Victoria at the request of the citizens of Ballarat. 25 years later, right? So they came up, they saw that this was just a pigsty. You know, these soldiers had died, it was a pigsty, because most of them didn't have any relatives here in Australia, because they were soldiers had come in from overseas. About 60% were actually Irish on the soldiers' side. So government of Victoria request. Now if you come around on the other side, now you can read it all later, but the important thing is, and when you see the political dimensions, is whilst attacking a band of aggrieved diggers in arms against what they regarded as a tyrannous administration. Right, so you can actually see the different take. Now in this cemetery there was a headstone to the little drummer boy who had died. Now you've got to remember, war is about propaganda. Now about a week before the rebellion, troops came in with cannons and wagons into Ballarat, and they were attacked by the miners as they went through the diggings. And the story was that the little drummer boy, the 12-year-old, had been brutally murdered by the diggers. Now this story did the rounds for 148 years, and there was a memorial there for the little drummer boy who had been cruelly killed. The little drummer boy actually wasn't killed, he had a slight flesh wound, and he lived to be a man of 64 here in Victoria. But and it took one of the researchers, I've forgotten her name, you remember her name? One of the local researchers here to actually find out the little drummer boy didn't die, and the gravestone was removed about 2 years before the 150th anniversary. So war is about propaganda, and it's about people getting a message across which suits them. So
that was a lie.
It was a total lie, fabrication, total lie. Because if the diggers were bad enough to kill a little boy, they're animals.
So who was the little drummer boy?
Well, he was a little drummer boy. Because those days they used to have little drummer boys. And he was shot.
What did he do? He was a drummer for what?
For one of the troops, one of the army. So if the diggers were, mean enough to kill a 12-year-old boy, how could you? Innocents, killing the innocents, all right?
Children.
So that was removed when the research proved that it was a lie. So I'll leave you to it. I mean, think about it. Any people want to talk, but we'll leave it about 5.
Question.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
I was going to say, were all or some of the soldiers mercenaries?
No, they were the police. There were 90 police and about 220 soldiers. The soldiers were regular army. They'd been brought across by Hotham because they knew that there was going to be a rebellion at some particular point in time. They were concerned that it was a very difficult rebellion. You've got to remember the British Empire was always involved in rebellions, putting down rebellions. I was concerned because, see, tactically, the diggers made the big mistake of congregating in a stockade, which is what the British were used to dealing with. Hotham's biggest problem was that if the diggers stood in their diggings and fired from their diggings and didn't congregate into one area, then they would have been very difficult to put down. So as soon as the stockade was formed, the people in the government offices in Ballarat and in Melbourne were rubbing their hands in glee because they knew that they could put this rebellion down. 15,000 people went to the mass meeting on the 29th of November. 1,500 took the oath the next day. 2,000 drilled on the Saturday. When the rebellion was put down, there were 120 people in the enclosure. 120. And if you look at the death rate, you're going to death rate of about 1 in 3, which is extraordinarily high. That only happens when people are massacred usually, after the event. So the actual stockade was a tactical blunder, and they took full advantage of wiping out resistance. Because I mean, what it did is it engendered fear in the community. The army came in, they imposed martial law, but they had a big problem. The people in Melbourne became restless. There were thousands of people on the streets in Melbourne. There were public meetings. and they were concerned there was going to be a revolution in Melbourne, and they had all their troops up here, so they actually put in 1,500 special constables in Melbourne to try to maintain order, but it never actually broke up. The interesting thing is, 1 year later, less than 1 year later, when the 13 men charged with high treason were put before juries, each and every one of them was acquitted. Could you imagine today, if we set up a stockade down the road, took up arms and shot up a few police officers, how many of us would have been acquitted?
No.
So they were acquitted because what they were doing was supported by the population at large.
So the bit of unrest in Melbourne was in support of...
Yes, there was up all over Victoria. There was up in the Bendigo diggings, in Melbourne. There were public meetings. There was unrest, and the reason, I mean, the first man they put on trial in February '55 was a John Joseph, who was a black man from New York, who fought quite valiantly in the stockade, and they thought, no white jury is going to find this man innocent. If we can convict him, we'll convict the rest of them. And he was acquitted within 30 minutes of the end of the trial. And he was shared through the streets of Melbourne that afternoon. And that set the agenda. Now, so what I'm saying is, they were part of a popular mass movement, and that's why they're remembered. And that's why they can't be pigeonholed as terrorists or people. They reflected the mood of the community, a significant portion of the community at that period in time, crossing class lines as well as racial lines, religious lines, national lines. And that was the strength of that movement.
Were you ever able to find out where John Joseph was buried?
Well, I was told that John Joseph was buried here, so I found the grave in it's a bit old.
You've been around a while.
2005, and it turned out to be another John Joseph who was a businessman here. It wasn't that John Joseph. We think that John Joseph eventually went to New Zealand, looking again, trying to find his fortune in the Goldfields of New Zealand. So the John Joseph is buried here, which is listed in the Eureka Encyclopedia as the John Joseph who was acquitted is not the same John Joseph, and I pointed that out to the people